Good morning. We're ready to do chapter 18. So yesterday, the last thing that happened was they had met with Angela Dupree, and she had said something to the effect that it wasn't where he came from, but maybe when he came from, which is odd. Okay, chapter 18. When, Chip repeated numbly. Jonah was thinking that maybe English wasn't his native language after all. Maybe he'd spent his first few months of life hearing some other language, and maybe that was why he couldn't make Angela's words make sense in his head. Catherine started laughing. "Oh, thanks," she said sarcastically. "That makes everything as clear as mud." She flipped her hair over her shoulder. We already know the when Chip and Jonah were both adopted 13 years ago. 12 years, 10 months, and 4 days to be exact, Chip said. Angela narrowed her eyes, looking at Catherine. "Perhaps you'd like to hear my story before you dismiss it," Angela asked. "Well, please," Jonah said, and he was proud of himself that he'd managed to say so much when he was feeling so jangly and strange. Angela looked down at the table, and it occurred to Jonah that maybe she was nervous too. Nervous talking to a couple of kids? That didn't make sense either. 13 years ago, Angela began, I worked exactly 1 day at Sky Trails Airlines. Catherine opened her mouth, and Jonah could tell she was about to say something snarky and mean like, "Wow, did you get fired after 1 day? Or were you just too lazy to go back for day 2? Jonah glared at his sister. He pressed his thumb and forefinger together and drew them across his lips. The universal sign for shut up. He hoped the full force of his glare plus the gesture would let her know. "If you say one more nasty thing, I will throw you out. And Chip and I won't tell you a single word that Angela says, so you won't know a thing." Catherine coughed. Sky Trails? She said weakly. "It's an old airline. Probably none of you have heard of it because it went out of business about 10 years ago," Angela said. "It went bankrupt, didn't pay for any of its creditors. But I still get a disability check from SkyTrails every single month." Disability, Jonah thought. That was for people who couldn't work anymore because they were too sick or were disabled. Angela looked as if she could run a marathon, even in those funky high heels she was wearing. And anyhow, Jonah had had some vague notion that disability checks came from the government, not private businesses. Angela was looking around from Catherine to Jonah to Chip as if she expected one of them to ask another question. No one said anything. Angela sighed. "That 1 day at Sky Trails changed my life," she said. "What I saw, well, you won't believe me and nobody else will back up my story, but I know what I saw. I'm not crazy." Oh, Jonah thought. Can people maybe get disability checks for being crazy too? Angela shrugged. "I can tell by your eyes you've already started to doubt me," she said in a voice that was strangely choked. Jonah wondered, why would it matter to Angela whether 3 kids believed her? But Angela continued, "I'm going to tell you this anyhow. I think I have to." "Okay," Chip said. Angela clasped her hands together on the table, seeming to steel herself for the story ahead. "During my 1 day as a gate agent at Sky Trails, an unidentified plane arrived at the airport," Angela said. "It was an unscheduled landing, completely unexpected. Depending on who you believe, either the radar was out of order briefly while it was landing, or it just appeared out of nowhere." Jonah saw Catherine stiffen. "I was evidently the only person who saw it appear," Angela said. "The only person who was looking." "Did it disappear too?" Catherine asked in a small voice. Angela shot her a surprised look. "I was planning to get to that part until later," Angela said, "but yes. I saw something like that happen once too," Catherine admitted. "Not a whole plane appearing and disappearing, but a person, a man." "So you know what it's like," Angela said slowly. "Knowing exactly what you saw but thinking that it couldn't possibly have happened like that? Second-guessing yourself, having other people make fun of you because you won't say, 'Oh, well, I must have made a mistake.'" "Exactly," Catherine said, nodding eagerly. Any second now, they'd be throwing themselves into hugs, sobbing onto each other's shoulders, proclaiming, "Nobody understands me but you." "Can we get back to the story?" Chip interrupted. "That plane, was I on it? Was Jonah? Did it crash? Is that why we're listed as survivors? I'll want to look at the records and find out where it came from. Maybe talk to the pilot." Angela snorted. It didn't crash, she said, but good luck finding any records or the pilot. But, Chip sputtered. Angela's look was sympathetic again. I'm willing to bet that you two were on that plane, she said. They were lots of babies, and if I was listed as a witness and you weren't listed as survivors, that's the only thing I've ever witnessed where government agents got involved like that. But why were government agents involved? Jonah asked. A plane landed. It didn't crash. Big deal. Somehow, he could gloss over the whole appearing, disappearing part of the story, just as he glossed over when Catherine was telling about that vanishing man in Mr. Reardon's office. He believed in ignoring unpleasant facts in hopes that they'd just go away. An unauthorized plane landed, Angela corrected him. That's supposed to set off an alert for the entire airport. There's a whole protocol to be followed in those situations that I, being new, forgot about. But when I heard the first baby crying, me, Jonah thought, was I crying? Wasn't the baby with its parents, Chip asked, or some adult? Angela looked him straight in the eye. The plane was full of babies. 36 of them, she said, but there wasn't a single adult aboard. Chip laughed, a bitter sound in the sudden silence. What? Babies were flying the plane? You expect me to believe that? Goo goo gaga, air traffic control, this is baby plane over? He mocked. It sounds like something out of a diaper commercial. Angela fixed him with a steely look. The FBI's theory was that there had been a pilot, a co-pilot, a whole flight crew, but they escaped somehow, even though they were security cameras at the gate and none of them showed anyone leaving the plane before I stepped on. So maybe there was a secret door somewhere out of the camera's view, Jonah said, or maybe it was an experimental high-tech plane that worked on autopilot. He was still looking for realistic explanations, but if experimental high-tech autopilot was the best he could do, he was really getting desperate. You think the pilot and flight crew just vanished into thin air? Catherine said, her voice ringing off with confidence. Possibly, Angela said, or she stopped. That one word hung in midair, tantalizing. Or, Jonah prompted. Angela shook her head. I'll work up to that one, she said dryly. Chip will just start laughing at me again. I'm sorry, Chip said, though he really didn't sound like he meant it. You're making this all like the Twilight Zone-ish, but it just seems like, well, what Mr. Reardon told Jonah and Catherine sounds about right. There was some sort of baby smuggling ring, and they were forced to land. Maybe the police were shooting them down. Maybe they just ran out of gas or oil or whatever planes use. But anyhow, the plane ran away and left the babies behind because they didn't want to get caught. So really, as long as the FBI or INS, whoever looked at the plane, if they looked at it, I don't know, the instruction book in the cockpit to see what language it was written in, then there should have been lots of clues about where it came from, and surely they have all that in their records. And you forgot what I said, Angela said in a steely voice. The plane disappeared. Maybe it didn't disappear exactly, Chip said. Maybe they just towed it away, or you thought. His voice trailed off because Angela and Catherine were glaring at him full force. I told you you wouldn't believe me, Angela said, and she sounded so sad that Jonah felt guilty on Chip's behalf. Jonah wasn't sure what to make of Angela's story either, but he wasn't going to tell her that. Shall I continue? Angela asked. Meekly, all three nodded. Before I knew what was going on, there were FBI agents there and police and airport officials and airline officials and all sorts of other officials I couldn't even identify, Angela said. They were treating the whole airplane like a crime scene, a mystery to solve. But you know, there were all those babies, and when one started crying, they all started crying. And you could just tell it was driving those official types crazy. So they organized this baby brigade, and we all had these people carrying the babies off the plane. We were supposed to pay close attention to which seat each baby had came from, in case that was important. We didn't have carriers or strollers or anything like that, so we just closed off the entire gate area and lined the babies up on the floor. We were just lucky none of them was old enough to be crawling yet. Jonah had been to the airport a couple times. Once he was in 3rd grade, and his Cub Scout troop had taken a field trip to learn about planes. And once when his family had gone to Disney World and Dad hadn't wanted to drive. Jonah could just imagine the chaos of 36 babies being taken off of a plane at once. But surely it would have been chaos. Surely lots of people would have seen. Angela was still talking. The moment we had all the babies off the plane, and all the agents and officials and airline personnel were off the plane too, because they were trying to get the babies sorted out at that moment, I looked back. And I could see the plane just like normal, just like I could see the carpet under my feet, or the rubber lining around the door, or my hand in front of my own face. It was there. And then it was gone. There was nothing there except air, and I could see straight up to the runway lights and the satellite dishes and the highway. Even now, 13 years later, Angela's voice was full of wonderment. It was like she was still amazed and still stunned. And once again, "You were the only one to see this?" Chip asked, making no effort to keep the skepticism out of his voice. Angela turned her head sharply. "No," she said. "Monique saw the plane disappear. Monique Waters was my boss. But later, when Monique saw how things were going, she denied it all. She was the one who filled out the disability paper saying I was delusional and prone to hallucinations and unfit to work at Sky Trails." "How do you know she saw it disappear?" Chip asked. "Because she screamed out, 'Holy crap! Where'd that plane go?'" Angela said, grinning slightly. Jonah was trying to absorb this. He sort of wanted to believe Angela. He was sure that she believed what she was telling them, but it was too incredible. "What about the other people?" Catherine began. "Didn't any of them?" "It was dark out," Angela said. "We were all carrying babies. You try to take care of 36 infants and still manage to think clearly. I think some of the other people might have seen the plane vanish, but then this one guy, James Reardon—" "The one we talked to," Catherine interrupted. Angela nodded. "He started running around, taking charge, telling people, 'All right, my agency has the plane towed away now. We'll handle it from here. Well, we'll advise you if we discover anything that's relevant to your department. Thanks for your help.' And later, I kind of wondered maybe some of those people had seen weird things like this before and had decided to pretend they didn't exist to be able to keep their jobs. It was close to Christmas time. They were happy to be sent home. Of course, none of them had seen the plane appear from nowhere and vanish into nothing. Both so they could believe the official story more easily." "Nobody went to the news media?" Chip asked. "Nobody put it out there on the internet? Not that the plane vanished even, just that there were these mysterious bunch of babies. Didn't we make CNN?" His voice sounded mocking, but when Jonah glanced his way, Chip's face was deadly serious. Angela shrugged. "The internet wasn't the big deal like it is today," she said, "and we weren't supposed to contact any newspaper or TV stations. James Reardon wanted us to sign confidentiality statements, but I refused." "Is that why you lost your job?" Jonah asked. "Pretty much," she said. "Monique told me not to come back until I was ready to sign the paper. I was never ready. I did talk to a newspaper reporter. I did call a TV station. But when everyone else said I was crazy, what good did it do?" She held her hands out, a gesture of helplessness. Jonah tried to imagine being like Angela, standing up for the truth. He didn't think he could be so brave. "Why did it matter so much to you?" Chip asked. "I know what I saw," Angela said fiercely. "I trust my own eyes, and I wasn't going to lie because I thought it might be important. I thought the babies might be important. I thought we should really investigate, not just pretend nothing ever happened." "So you've investigated, haven't you?" Catherine said, jumping ahead. Her eyes were glowing, like she'd found a new hero. "That's one way of looking at it," Angela agreed. "The more common view would be that I've become a total crackpot, totally obsessed. My own family thinks I'm crazy now because I tell them that my phone is tapped, and that the government is watching me. But you know, sometimes paranoia is justified. I get paid for doing nothing, even though I've called many times and I said I don't deserve disability pay. So I decided to use the money to do research, to study physics." "Physics?" Catherine repeated. Clearly that wasn't what she'd expected. "Well, yeah," Angela looked down at her hands. Jonah noticed she had fingers knotted together like she was suddenly very tense. "Look, you're not going to believe me anyhow, but I shouldn't even tell you this part. I've been working on this for 13 years and it's gotten me nothing but scorn and mockery. And I've gotten no confirmation, no sign that what I believe is true, at least not since the first day. So maybe I should just pat your heads and tell you to run off and be good little children for your parents and don't worry about where you came from. Don't be like me, obsessed and paranoid and—" "We already are," Chip said firmly. "It's too late." "Speak for yourself," Jonah thought. but he was dying to hear Angela's theory too. He couldn't walk away now either. Angela took a deep breath. Okay, then, she said. One thing I saw that nobody else did, though I did report it when I was debriefed before they began talking about confidentiality statements, was an insignia on the plane. By the time everyone else saw the plane, it looked like another SkyTrails regional jet. But when I first saw it, the plane's door said, Tachyon Travel, Tachyon. You're all too young probably to have studied much physics, and anyway, this is very theoretical physics. So what's a tachyon? Catherine asked. She always hated being talked down to or told that she was too young for something. Tachyons are particles that travel faster than the speed of light, Angela said. The speed of light, Jonah thought? What's that got to do with anything? I thought nothing could travel faster than light, Catherine said, acting proud that she knew that. Nobody really knows, Angela said. She was speaking very carefully now, watching for their reactions. At least nobody knows yet. The theories are that if anything could go faster than light, all sorts of weird things would happen. Time and space would have a different relationship. Aging would be different. And if a plane could travel that fast, it'd become a time machine. Everyone stared at her. Chip was already shaking his head. Who'd send a bunch of babies in a time machine, he asked. What would be the point? I don't think anyone sent a bunch of babies in a time machine, Angela said, speaking very precisely. I think a bunch of adults got into a time machine, and I think it was an experiment, one of the first attempts at time travel. They didn't understand all the effects, so they didn't realize what would happen when they arrived in our time. She paused, letting that sink in. You mean, Catherine asked. Jonah couldn't tell if she really understood or if she was just prompting Angela. I mean that Chip and Jonah used to be much older than they are now, Angela said. I think they were changed by traveling through time. I think they and all the other babies came from the future. Ooh! So it could be a time machine. So time travel. Something to ponder on until tomorrow. All right. That was a good chapter. All right, see you later.